For every kid that didn't have a chance, and every kid that was out of options, Seattle Children's is fighting for you. Because this isn't about beating the odds. It's about changing them for all kidkind.
Hello, my name is Laura Kastner, and I'm happy to join Parent Ed Talks as your series moderator. I am a clinical professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at the University of Washington, also at the Department of Psychology. I'm the author of several books on parenting for parents, author of scientific articles in the area of adolescent medicine and child development, and I have a clinical practice in which I see children, adults, and families. So thank you for coming today. For this year's Parent Ed Talk series, Parent Map has put together a pool of some of the best parenting media in the country. Chicago Parent, Metro Parent, Staten Island Parent, and New York Family. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us today for today's Parent Ed Talk event entitled Unplug and Rewire, Raising Screen-Savvy Kids in the Tech Era with Joe Clement and Matt Miles. On behalf of our parenting media partners across the country, it's our collective passion and purpose to help build inclusive, safe, educated, and loving communities for our families. We are dedicated to the mission of serving and being a resource to parents, and we never settle for the status quo. Before we kick off learning with Joe and Matt, please take a moment to let us know what city you're joining us from and put your answers in the Zoom chat. While we let everybody respond, we have a few tech items we'd like to share with you. First of all, we will email everybody the link after the event. We would love to hear your thoughts. The Zoom chat feature is open to you to share your comments and questions throughout the event. We encourage you to ask questions, and we will do our best to incorporate your questions to today's session. Closed captioning will be enabled by clicking the Zoom closed caption or CC at the bottom of your screen. Joe Clement and Matt Miles are award-winning teachers, coaches, and mentors with a combined 30 years of experience improving the education of young people. They are co-authors of the award-winning book, Screen Schooled. Two veteran teachers expose technology overuse, and it's making our kids dumber. And their writing has been featured in Psychology Today and the Washington Post. They're both parents, and they live in Northern Virginia. So please join me in welcoming Joe and Matt, and they'll speak for about 15 minutes or so, and then we'll launch to the Q&A.
Well, hey, everybody. Thanks very much for being here, and really appreciate y'all for having us. This is a great opportunity, and I'll jump kind of to the end of the story here. This is one of the great uses of technology. I'm just looking in the chat, seeing people from all over the country here. That's awesome. Matt and I are going to talk for not very long, maybe 15 minutes or so. We're going to paint with pretty broad strokes, and then we hope to have a back and forth. I know people can get kind of Zoom fatigued of just the talking head yammering along. So we'll try and keep our comments pretty short, and then hopefully engage in some really productive discussion. I have to say at the outset, I'm required to give a disclaimer that I am not speaking on behalf of our employer. The school system that employs us is very much on the other side of this issue, and it's too bad. I wish I could say we were speaking very much with the backing of our employer, but we're not. And I don't know, obviously people are in this conference here from all over the country, so maybe we'll hear about that. We're kind of all over the place. Matt and I started writing this book, and we got to update our bio, Matt, because I've got 30 years now myself.
You're getting up there, Joe.
Yeah. Matt has another, I don't know, bunch. So
16.
We've been at this for a while, and we noticed I don't know, 8 or 10 years ago, both of us independently noticed that our kids were having trouble doing things that teenagers ought to be able to do. We teach in a high school, and interact socially, think critically, focus, for more than 5 seconds at a time, solve basic problems of in the classroom and just in life in general. And we just kind of wonder what was going on, and our wonderings turned into a lot of reading and a lot of talking to different people, and then eventually we realized that we were both kind of parallel doing the same thing. And so we got together and we decided to start reading about what was going on specifically in schools. And what we came across, pretty much everything we came across had some component of overuse of screens, was some sort of cause of bad stuff happening to kids. And we didn't set out to write a book about screen overuse. We just were trying to figure out what was going on with our young people. And so over time, the more reading we did, the more we realized this was the issue. And so we said, well, let's start reading about what's happening in schools with screens. And we couldn't find anything other than, if you really want your kids to have 21st century skills, then you got to have them on computers, and schools need computers and so on. So because there wasn't anything out there and we had done so much reading on our own, we ended up writing this book, Screen Schooled. And it's been kind of interesting that, it was published in 2017. We did most of the writing in 2016, and our observations were, in the 3 to 5 years before that. And it's just kind of been interesting that over time, particularly since COVID, the book has actually sold better, I think, after, like, it just in the last year or two than it did even in the beginning. And I think it's because we're all seeing the same thing. Matt and I are teachers, but we're also both parents. And so we've seen it with our own kids, and we've seen it in the classroom. So that's the kind of the journey that we were on. And Matt, if you want to kind of walk through what we've seen in the last couple of years, or what the vision was.
Yeah, and this is kind of a backdrop to what we were arguing against in, like Joe just alluded to. In 2015, we really kind of started down this journey, and this is the direction of what a lot of educational policymakers were pushing and what they thought was cutting edge. This is a screenshot of, or this is a picture from, I believe it's from Rocket Ship, or there's a whole host of these school systems that are, they have a variety of names. The Total Tech Immersion is one name. Summit, Rocket Ship, but this idea is called total tech immersion, or personalized learning, or one-to-one. It's the idea that kids drive their own education through technology use, and by giving every kid a laptop and the ability to move through the curriculum at their own pace, that they would gleefully explore and learn. And Mark Zuckerberg promised that we'd learn 1,000 times more through this type of education. And a lot of school systems bought into this idea, where let's get kids on screens for most of the school day and let them work at their own pace. And this is what Screen Schooled is really arguing against. But a lot of schools didn't want to hear it. And Joe and I felt like we were kind of being like quieted and pushed to the side. And then COVID happened. And all of a sudden the infrastructure we had invested millions or even billions into, one-to-one, buying kids all these laptops, our teacher trainings for 5, 6, 7 years leading up to COVID was all about how to do what they call guide on the side. Teachers aren't really to be interacting with their students, but rather giving kids links to things that they can explore on their own. And we weren't to be sage on the stage, where we're interfering with kids' curiosity, and we're taking over. And then when COVID happened, everybody's like, all right, this is what we've been working towards. We've been encouraging kids to do this essentially what teachers were doing in their classrooms was distance learning, but in the classroom, they were sitting off to the side like we were being told to do, and letting kids just learn on their own. What's the difference if they're sitting in another house? So we did it, and we did it for a year. We had really no choice. It was the only kind of answer to COVID, and it was this vision of education's moment to shine. What we had been arguing against for 5 or 6 years, let's run with it. And what we saw is, after a year and a half of this style of education, we have since, in the years after COVID, where we've gone back to physical school, we've had to invest over 200 billion or not quite, but $200 billion to compensate for the learning loss that happened by just that year. And I don't know if you guys caught this. This came out yesterday or the day before. The new PISA studies came out that measure kids' success in mathematics and reading over time, and they've been doing this since 2000. And the learning loss created by that year of an ed tech based education, what we've all thought was cutting edge, what we've all been preparing for way before COVID, what we've all been as educators been told is the future of education. After a year of that being implemented and put into reality, we have unprecedented losses, even after $200 billion spent to compensate for that. There's still, they estimate from this article I read, they estimate it's about a 3/4 of a year behind pace. That's almost essentially the time that we spent in virtual learning. Even $200 billion hasn't erased that huge deficit. So that's to say they learned nothing, right? A year of doing what we were told is cutting edge and 21st century skills and the future of education, they literally learned nothing. And as parents, we saw that firsthand. I don't know, Joe, you watched your kid, you taught your kid online, right?
Yeah, I taught my kid online, so I got to see what it looked like while I was in here and he was in his bedroom mostly asleep. And you know, you really, as parents, we got to see what it looked like from the home end. And as teachers, we got to see what it looks like from the teacher end. It was, you know, I think we can agree it wasn't the way many people would choose. I would say probably most people would choose to have their kids going to school, so the learning clearly hit a pause button at that point. And there were probably, I mean, I think we can agree, many reasons for the learning loss. But if there were, if ed tech had worked the way we were told it was going to be that it was going to work, and we were, you know, heavily trained. Most teachers at this point, you know, by the time COVID happened, we were told ahead of time. I mean, before the, you know, anybody knew anything about a pandemic, that this was coming, and this was, you know, this is it, you know, this is ed tech's moment. If that had worked out the way that ed tech thought it was going to work out, then I think we probably see this.
Yeah, or they promised it would, right? Spending $200 billion to compensate for 1 year of their vision is a far cry from unlocking 1,000 times more learning, right? I mean, they literally learned 0 times what we typically learn, right? So that's it, and that just kind of opened our eyes to that. Wait a minute. There's been billions of dollars invested in advertising ed tech products by people like the Gates Foundation, people like the Zuckerbergs, and that's just them, right? There's all this money being spent on, here's the potential technology can unlock. And what we all saw is what, you know, and not to say that Joe and I like called it, but we called it, right? Like is ed tech and tech in general has a habit of over promising, right? And I think that's where we finally, since we all realized it, the paradigm has finally started to shift, and we're starting to kind of consider, well, wait a minute, should we have access to technology unencumbered? Does everything need to be on things? We see schools like France banning phones. We see the UN calling for a worldwide ban of cell phones in schools. We see the UK banning phones. We see the Netherlands banning phones. We see that because we finally starting to realize, wait a minute, is it all good? Right.
Right. And we can, I want to make clear that when we wrote our book, the question, and I've already seen this pop up in the chat, is when we wrote the book, the criticism we got was, well, this is correlation, this is not causation. Well, okay. And what we were reading was, you know, peer-reviewed science that was pretty close. But they would always end with that caveat that more research needed to get done. Well, the book again was published in 2017. In the last 6 or 8 years, there's been quite a bit published, and the evidence out there right now that's peer-reviewed, that, you know, is actual science, is pretty clear that there's causative links, and we can go into some of that. You know, we have, I don't know how this would work afterward. We can provide a document, you know, that's got some of the studies that are listed that show the causation. There are studies that you see that show some learning gains from educational technology in schools. We certainly aren't saying, the toothpaste is out of the tube. We're not saying, well, let's run and hide and never use a screen, and we don't want anybody on screen ever, because that would be ridiculous. But the learning gains that you see come in when technology is used really well, when it's used in targeted ways, in specific circumstances, for a specific purpose. If I need to hammer a nail, I don't grab a saw, right? Like the technology is a tool and it has to be used in the right circumstances. And what schools often do, not just with technology, but what schools often do is say that we have a problem, so we're going to do this to fix the problem, and that's it. We're all in on this one thing because this is going to be the solution. And when if you're you stand still long enough in education, you become an innovator, and you see the same things come in and over and over and over and get repackaged, and you become you're kind of skeptical over time because you see the decision makers say, this is it, this is definitely the thing. And there's nothing that's going to be like that. There's no one thing that's going to transform it. And technology for sure has a role. It just doesn't have the role that many school systems have gone to. So there are two things that I think we can agree on. Hopefully we can agree on. One is that young people are spending too much time on screens. This is I think that's the common sense study that shows that, there was already a lot pre-COVID, and then since COVID, the amount is, we're pushing 9 hours a day for a teenager using, and this is entertainment media. So that's an awful lot. And one of the questions you got to ask yourself is not simply what are they doing when they're on screen, but also what are they not doing? What's the opportunity cost? And we're going to get into more of that. Here, this is kind of the quote, the way that researchers are framing it is social media is like a nuclear bomb for a teen social life. The numbers of the amount of time that kids spend interacting with each other personally, face to face, has just fallen off a cliff. Jean Twenge is a researcher who's written a couple books. The most recent one is called Generations, and it's if you really want to, first of all, I think that's a great resource. But there's her bibliography in Generations is pretty astounding when it comes to causative links between specific things like social media and negative mental health outcomes, and the inability to focus, and how that's linked to screen overuse and so on. So I think we can agree, hopefully, that many kids, not every single kid, many kids are spending too much time in front of a screen-based media, entertainment media, one. And two, that spending too much time on anything is no good. If it's too much, then it's too much. So there's too much time being spent looking at screens, and that's not good for kids. So we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing in schools? And many school systems are heading down the road of one-to-one, which is where you give every kid a computer. And that's a nice idea. This is somebody I met last week. I was at the World Innovation Summit for Education in Qatar, and I met the CEO of the Education Outcomes Fund, Amel Karbul, and her statement to this group of industry experts and some teachers was that if your school district's spending money on one-to-one, you're pouring money down the drain. And that's because, again, we've seen that there isn't the like Matt mentioned earlier, there isn't the results that educational tech companies are promising just simply aren't there. So the question, and we'll wrap up after this, is where do we go from here? And we have three main recommendations. The first one is we have to remember as parents that we've got the power, that school systems pay attention to committed parents who don't go away. And I'm not saying that one phone call to the superintendent is going to change everything in your school system. However, a group of parents who are committed, who are knowledgeable, and continue to make common sense, reasonable demands will eventually be paid attention to. And one of the things that we have to demand is that technology is used like chalk or paper or whatever, any other type of technology. And when I say technology, I mean screen-based technology. It's used as a tool in certain circumstances. That's all. Intentional use. If you're talking about astronomy, you've taken an astronomy class, you're going to need probably some sort of device that's got the Google Sky on it, and you can look at what's going on in the sky right now. Having a book with a star map in it doesn't do you any good, right? There are times where technology obviously has a role. This is a great use of technology, obviously. But again, we have to demand that the teacher training is focused on that type of use, intentional use, because I think what a lot of young teachers have gotten in their teacher training at this point is it's all going to be on screens, and you have to be ready to interact with kids that way. The second thing is simply get phones out of school. Phones are different than, and I think people have mentioned this, phones are different than laptops or tablets or anything else. They're a distraction. A kid of ours crystallized it a few years ago when he said, if you see me on my laptop, there's about a 50% chance I'm doing something productive. If you see me on my cell phone, there's a 0% chance I'm doing something productive. And that's pretty close to the truth for, I would say, pretty close to 100% of my kids. They have their phones out, they're overwhelmingly, they're goofing off. And we can talk more again about that. And I know people have got questions about safety and staying connected to their kids and so on, we can get into. And then we want to focus on true for 21st century skills. That's really the key, because people say, well, aren't our kids going to be behind if they're not using computers or technology or whatever? This is the World Economic Forum top 10 skills of 2023. And you see that these skills look an awful lot like 20th century skills or 19th century skills, human skills. What is it that we still bring to the table? Analytical thought, critical thought, resilience, and so on. Now you see number 6 is technological literacy. Again, it's a tool. Of course, you want a kid to be technologically literate, but what that does not mean is knowing how to play video games and use social media necessarily. If you're going to be a social media consultant, there's a small number of those jobs, and yeah, that's important. What they mean by technological literacy is being able to use programs like Excel and Access and learn how to work with data and create reports for people based on, this is just raw data and I'm going to make it look like something else. That's technology. And that's the kind of
how to download a document and send it to your teacher.
With that, yeah, that would be good. But the rest of these things on here, empathy and dependability and so on, are skills that we've needed since, humans have been humans. So I think, Matt, we should probably wrap it up there, and maybe let's jump into a discussion, have some Q&A, if that works.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to tee up my questions that just went on top of your skills. Just a second. Okay, thanks for that. And before we get started, this is a moment where we like to ask everybody to respond to a poll and let us know which publication you used when you registered for this event. So thank you for doing that. And I'll just tell the audience, we know you have lots and lots of questions about tech being used at home, but we're going to stay on the subject of education for just a bit too. Okay, thanks for responding to the poll. Okay, so we know at this point that digital use on phones, on tablets, on PCs impair concentration and focus. They dilute the focus. Yes, kids can go back and forth between screens, but it really does impair focused attention and therefore learning. I'm really curious, in your reading the studies since you published your book in 2016, with this greater awareness of what it detracts from learning in the classroom, what do you think is getting better and what do you think is getting worse?
What do you, can I just ask you to clarify a little bit? What you mean?
In terms of so people are aware that it really does affect the learning in the classroom to have multiple screens open. So the obvious answer to that is have more regulation, have more accountability, have more rules, have more teachers with principals coming in the room and saying, "Ooh, you're really overusing that stuff. We got to do something different." So do you see this greater awareness actually transferring over to changing some of the patterns in classrooms of overuse?
I'll start, Matt. in our school system, and I think in other large school systems, no, I'm not seeing the awareness change over just yet. But that's what's interesting is the awareness of, there's a huge focus on mental health, right? We know that we've got a mental health crisis among people worldwide, young people in particular. And so what we know is, like, Melissa Hunt, she's a professor at University of Pennsylvania. She published one of the first studies that shows a causative link between bad mental health outcomes and elevated social media use. We are seeing in our school system a much bigger focus on mental health. Now, there's very little talk about how that's linked to student social media use and other elevated screen use. However, that if there's something good, I guess that's it. That we're seeing more focus on mental health. The problem, as far as I'm concerned, is that we continue to tell kids that they've got to have a computer in order to learn, or they've got to have their cell phone in order to learn. And that's at this point, it's pretty clear that's not helping.
I would just add on to that. As far as our school district has gone from, like, one that has prided itself to being on the cutting edge and trying to incorporate cell phones. And why, anytime a teacher would ask about, like, limiting cell phone use pre-COVID, I would say, the question would be, well, why would you want to do that? Why don't you, teach kids how to use it productively and incorporate it? Kids love learning on their phones. They love their phones. So do things on their phones. And that was kind of the response. Since COVID and in the last 2 years, there's been consideration of cell phone bans, and the more recent policy that was created by the school board last year was they allowed teachers to ban cell phones, but in reality, it's pretty much toothless. We're not allowed as teachers we can ban cell phones, we can't collect them, and we can't take them from kids, and we can't, there's no consequence for a kid who uses his phone. But the fact that we're having this discussion, I think is an indication that we're on that path. People are finally saying, well, that's interesting. Maybe we should limit access to this.
And I would say that that's when we talk to people. Like I said, we go to conferences and we're presenting and interviewing people because we have a new book in the works. It sounds like the experience we have in our school system is not unusual. I know there are some school systems that are taking it more seriously, though.
Let's elaborate on that too. You've talked a lot about collaborative learning and some of the irony that goes with getting a Google Doc in the classroom where they can just talk to each other and collaborate, but instead they're doing a Google Doc. What's the point? And you make the point in your books. You have a couple of nice, simple guidelines of keep it simple, importance of critical thinking, and promoting social interactions, part of the learning process. So let's talk about the last piece first. Tell us more about why human interaction, interpersonal interaction on learning projects is important.
Well, I can take this, but just social interaction in general is critical to just our human existence. We're a very social species. Our survival and dominance of becoming an apex predator is all predicated on social interactions. When we can communicate, we double our size and we double our strength, and we go from a pretty flimsy animal to quite a complex animal just because we can interact. So 100,000 years of evolution later, we all pretty much have some level of need for affinity. We need to talk to others. We need to be accepted by others, and part of the reason why we see the pandemic exacerbate and worsen the mental health crisis that was already in line and bad 5-6 years prior to that is because when we're interacting with each other on our phone, that's a far inferior interaction than when we're having a face-to-face interaction. So anytime we can get face-to-face interaction, we crave that, we need that. And something that I'll typically say about social media is not a media to socialize. And that's kind of a misnomer. What it is instead, especially how teens use it, they're not using it to connect to others, right? They're not collaborating and using things like Google Docs to connect to others. social media is a social capital calculator, right? They can log in and see exactly how popular they are and see how many. So every post isn't an interaction. It's not a face-to-face communication. It's not any type of communication. Taking a picture of yourself, which is primarily what they do on social media, is probably the least interactive thing you can imagine. But what they're doing is they're checking in on their stock, right? How many likes do I get? How many comments do I get? Right? How popular am I? And in the adolescent mind, that is the most like important thing is developing your sense of identity. Is what is my social capital? And you give a kid that ability and they're constantly checking it. But what they're lacking, and Joe mentioned this earlier, is that what is that opportunity cost? If I'm spending 9 hours a day, and a lot of that comes in school, if I'm spending that on my phone, I'm missing out on that needed interaction, right? I'm not having that face-to-face real-time connection. And what's sad is, I mean, we have periods of the day where it's free time, and the kids, again, going back to this idea of we have to allow them to use their phones. It's 45 minutes of unencumbered time. And what's shocking, and this is one of the things that really opened our eyes to write this book, is the sound of the silence. Right now, you have 30 kids crammed into a small room, and it's silent. Nobody's interacting with each other. Nobody's talking. Instead, they choose to be connecting socially. We need kids learning face-to-face interaction because they need it. One, and two, they need it for their own mental well-being. They need it for their own, to not be so depressed, right? But they also need that skills. We showed you earlier that, a lot of those skills involve, those 21st century skills involve interaction, leadership, collaboration. Those are things that require
Right.
the face real-time interaction.
Right. I mean, when you think about it, in the classroom is an opportunity to look at faces, interpret emotions, know when you need to pull back, know when you need to practice patience. A lot of kids don't know how to just even let other students talk because they get impatient. Oh, that's dumb. My idea is better. So there's so much learning about emotional regulation, about maybe enhancing somebody's idea. Building on people's idea. You won't do that unless you have practice. So it's the basis of social and emotional learning. So that's my plug. So let's go to the second part, and that's critical thinking. Whenever you read an article about what happens with AI and robots and teaching and everything, people say, oh, the loss of critical thinking. And, I had a teenager tell me the other day that she loves ChatGPT because she used to have this phobia to the empty page. And now she can just do ChatGPT and get an outline on a research paper. And okay, great. You don't have that phobia anymore. However, think about the skills that it takes to go through original documents, synthesize, pull out from that and make an outline. But it's just like, boom, we've got ChatGPT. So why don't you two as teachers talk about what you see as the loss of critical thinking, or how much we need it and how it might lag behind with too much tech overuse?
Right. One of the things we know is that we don't, first of all, read as deeply when we're reading off a screen, and that's adults, kids, anybody, that especially with all the different distractions and the clickbait that we all have, our eyes just tend to jump around a lot more. So it's very difficult to establish any kind of continuity. What we do when we do that, and you see kids on the endless scroll, and the guy who invented the endless scroll, by the way, a year or so ago, apologized to humanity for having invented the endless scroll because of how addictive that is. You're training your brain to not be able to do anything for very long. It needs that newness. It needs some sort of novelty all the time. And if you're not able to immerse yourself in an idea or a concept and really wrestle with it, then there's really not the ability. What goes right along with that is the ability to think critically. I can't get any deeper into this problem because I've thought about it for 3 seconds, but now it's boring. I need something else. So to me, the problems of focus and critical thought are very much linked together. And the PISA scores that came out would seem to indicate also they have a kind of a corollary study. PISA measures math, science, and reading, but they have this critical thought measurement that they use. And I don't know how good it is, but it's the same one over and over and over. So you get some idea of a trend, and the critical thought piece is mirroring what we're seeing in the classroom, which is the reduction in this ability to think critically. And again, I think that's pretty heavily related to this disability to focus.
Well, and I want to touch on something you mentioned, and it's not totally related, but you mentioned the girl had anxiety about the blank page, and technology helps cope with that. And we're so conditioned to be so concerned with anxiety and depression, and we are in the midst of a mental health crisis, that we look at technology as anything that can eliminate anxiety. That's great, but the reality is anxiety is dread, right? It's dread of the unknown, and it's also a motivating emotion, right? It gets me working. I don't, for many of us now, some people can have paralyzing anxiety, of course, right? But this idea of let's remove everything that makes our kids uncomfortable, and technology can do that as a good thing. That's not a good thing, because there's a lot of skills underlying there, right? Why does she dread the page of the unknown, right? Most of us don't like getting started working. We have to learn how to do that. One of the things we hear often is like, instead of having your kids talk, have them tweet to a Twitter wall, and then the kids who have anxiety about talking to other kids well, don't we want them to overcome that anxiety, right? So that they don't grow up paralyzed with anxiety because they've never had to talk to another person. Like it's shocking. You go through our halls and you just see like any little nook and cranny in this building, there's a kid cowering behind a phone, and then he goes into a classroom. He doesn't have to talk to people, right? There are technologies out there that are designed to amplify skills, right? And there's technology out there designed to replace skills. Are we trying to replace the skill of interacting? Or are we trying to replace the skill of critical thinking? Or are we trying to, the whole idea of the blank page, like, let me get started. There's so many possibilities. How do I think critically and kind of narrow it down, right? Is that the skill we're trying to replace with technology? Or do we want the kid to learn how to do it so that they're no longer anxious? I used to have a paralyzing fear of speaking in front of public. Now I do it every day. So I'm glad, and the only way I got over it is by doing it. So this whole idea of let's use technology to coddle and protect our kids and keep them moving forward. Do we want a generation of kids who never learned how to talk because it causes anxiety, never learned how to talk to I tell this story. I hand back a test to all my students, and by the time I get done handing out the 30 tests and sit at my desk, I already have 3 emails from parents of kids in the room asking me when they can retake the test, which is a whole nother thing, right? And I'm literally sitting in right now the desk. My laptop is where I sit, and I'm sitting at the desk of the student whose parent had emailed me. And I just look at him as, you couldn't ask me, and he got all like weird and awkward. But like, we want kids to learn how to do this. We want kids to learn how to communicate for themselves. We want them to come over these anxieties. The only way to do it is to learn how to do that skill.
Thanks. I'm smiling because that's the realm I work in, right? Facing anxieties and so forth. So thank you for all that endorsement. Another endorsement you have is please, parents, do not text during school. And I have to recommend that to parents all the time. I mean, they'll text their child, oh, I just thought of what the consequence will be for the beer I found at the sleepover on Saturday. And then there's an explosion, and they text all day and having a fight with their parent during school. So I know there are emergencies, but a lot of that is just, enabling more distraction at school. So that's a great recommendation of yours also. So I need to move toward all the questions, at least 15 questions on, please give us your advice on what limits you would recommend for the 7 to 12-year-old and how to do it, because kids don't like limits. So I'll just let you have it at that. And it's a lot more complicated than there's a playbook, but I'll let you just, because it's over and over. What would you recommend? What would you recommend? So have at it.
I have my kids are my own children are 25, 21, and 9. And my 9-year-old, I think, is the only one that of her friends that doesn't have a phone or a tablet or any kind of device. And it's hard. That's a difficult conversation. She understands it now. And I mean, she's grown up that way, so it's not like it was a change, but she understands where we are, and she, she could parrot the research at this point as much as I can. But what we have found has been helpful is to have conversations with other parents about this issue. And this is a very emotional. Like this is a tough one to have a conversation to have with other parents and not make it sound like you're making a value judgment on how you're raising your kid. Right. But if we can, what we've done in among my daughter's little friend group is talk about things that we can do that aren't screen related. And when they get together and they have play dates, what can they do that, they're outside and they're playing with this and they're building that and they're writing stories and they're whatever. I mean, they can do lots of different things that don't involve screens. And so as parents, it becomes easier if your kid is not the only one. Like that's the worst feeling in the world when you feel like you're leaving your kid out and every other kid has this cool thing, and that your kid is going to be kind of ostracized or whatever. And we could go as far as you want to go into it. I've got a ton of heartbreaking stories about kids and not having tech and what that's meant to them socially and so on. But when parents can together decide we're going to believe this and raise our kids in this particular way on this particular issue, it doesn't have to mean you agree on everything, but just on this particular issue, we're all going to be on the same page. That can be very helpful and it can be very empowering for parents.
I would
Go ahead.
I would just add there's this problem in ed tech, especially where a lot of these people who develop it don't know children and work with children. They may not even have children, right? And there's this idea of pushing this vision of children as little adults onto that. Like when we switched to Zoom, virtual, it went, oh, here are all these companies that already done it and it was working in the adult world. And then we did it. And within 30 minutes, it all shut down from kids flashing their genitalia to the cameras and blasting music. It was total chaos. And there's this idea, a 7 and 12-year-old or just at middle school in general, prior to like 18, kids really lack executive function. They can't delay gratification. They can't say, this is really fun, but this is really important. I really want the A, so I should not do this fun thing now. And let me really focus on because my future is important. And I get that, right? A kid can't do that. They're almost incapable of doing that, especially in the younger ages. They're regulated by their emotions instead and joy and things like that. So it makes it really hard for a kid to have a device that yes can contact mom and dad, and yes I can Google what does a word mean, but also I could watch anime, porn, play video games. I could do all these things. Here you go have fun. And I see, especially I teach a class, performance psychology, where I have 9th through 12th in it. I can tell you almost universally a 9th grade boy cannot handle a cell phone. They are on their cell phone 95% of the time, and they physically can't put it down because they don't have the emotional and the executive function to regulate such an engaging tool. And that's one of the issues to have, so this push, if communication is really critical with you and your kid, a dumb phone, right? One without Wi-Fi capabilities, one without data, one without kind of searchable, right? That needs to be kind of the direction, I would say, for a kid, especially that young. Every kid's different though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one of the questions from the parents was, what parent control apps would you recommend for parents that are just getting their kids on phones and phone access?
I would, my recommendation is, I mean, this comes from a place of, I work with young people all day, every day, and have for a long time. When young people want to get around whatever the control is that you put on it, they can get around it. There's no good. I mean, there are some that are better than others, I'm sure. I've never heard of a kid, because we'll talk about, I mean, I bring this up in class pretty regularly. We'll talk with students about, the firewall that the school puts up and the controls that are on the computers and the controls that are on their phones. And they know how to get around whatever it is. I mean, and it doesn't take, and even if your kid is not super tech savvy, all they have to do is ask some kid who is. And as soon as one kid finds out, everybody has found out. So
But I would add, Joe, for the parents that are listening that are have decided to get their children phones, even though we're sounding like Luddites here, saying, "Hey, wait till 8th grade if you possibly can. There's a movement. Try to get a movement with your friends." We really have to acknowledge that the genie's out of the bottle for many of the parents right now in elementary school, or are going to get them. And I think with the kindergarten to 3rd grade, 4th grade, if there's any kind of phone, hopefully a flip phone or a very restricted phone, some of the parent controls definitely work on the little kids. So don't give up.
Yes, yeah, for sure.
We're talking about a lot of
exactly.
tweens and teens here.
And yeah, and again, my background is with high school kids,
Yeah.
and they can figure it out for sure. And I think middle schoolers probably as well. Younger
Yeah.
kids probably, aren't going to figure it out, at least not quite as easily. But the key to me in whether we're talking about school or home is intentionality. Like it has to be, what do we want? There has to be a goal. What's the purpose of giving the kid the phone? What's the purpose of giving the kid the computer or the tablet? Is it just for, I mean, are we willing to say this is just for entertainment? I want them to have a toy and whatever. Okay, that's fine. And we bought a video game system, when I was younger, it was the Atari 2600. You buy something for an entertainment purpose, then treat it like it's an entertainment item, and you set a limit on it, and you got to get your homework done first, and this, that, and the other, and blah, blah, blah. But it has to be intentional. There has to be a purpose behind it that's not simply just go crazy with it. Now, what makes this, I want to loop this back to an earlier question. What makes this difficult is when schools say your homework is all online, your textbooks are all online, you have to turn this in online, you have to, there's a digital Dropbox, and you're the parent and you have set, a limit of 45 minutes a day, you can do whatever. So you get 45 minutes of entertainment media or an hour of entertainment media, whatever it is. And then the kid uses that, and then you see them still on their, you time it even, if you're going to really toe the line on this. And then after an hour, you look and they're still on their phone or they're on their laptop or whatever. What are you doing? Your hour's up. Oh, well, I got to do my homework now. And so this is one of those things that, again, parents, I think, need to push hard on is if we were going to add another recommendation, it would be to get textbooks offline. We know, there's a ton of studies out there on how much better we comprehend things that we read on paper versus reading off a screen. A whole bunch of guesses about why that is, but we know that that's the case. So why are, textbooks online? Then the kid gets online, and then again, like Matt said, with the executive function and kids controlling their impulses, it's very difficult for a kid to, say, well, go read about deponent verbs in Latin class, but don't go to Netflix or pornography or video games. That's a lot to put on a kid.
Right. Well, I've often wondered, and one of the strategies I've used with families is get everything off, download everything that you need for something. If only teachers and parents could collaborate on everything's downloaded and now you turn off all access. Wouldn't it be great to arrange actual focus on one thing? It's my ultimate fantasy that kids could actually have 1 hour on one thing. Now, on that point, I get it, you get it from parents you work with, so much complaint about so much homework, 5 hours of homework. And what it really is this much homework because they're toggling back and forth between 5 screens. So let me read one specific question because it's just sort of is so exemplifies. My 6th grader doesn't allow us to stay with him when doing homework on his school laptop, strongly claiming that his rights of having his privacy are being encroached. But obviously he spends a lot of time on non-homework related stuff. Often he doesn't finish his homework. He doesn't get enough sleep. Advice?
Well,
Go ahead, Matt.
I would just say that I've never heard of a right to privacy for homework. It's a very public thing, right? My parents were always checking my homework and looking over my shoulders, right? And then I hand it to my teachers, and it's a very public thing. I would push back at the assertion that there's a right to privacy to homework, and for that very reason, right? Kids are smart and they get it, and even my kid who's in 2nd grade, his school gave him a tablet. Which I don't like, but he has to do work, and he has figured out as this 8-year-old, he's figured out ways around to figure out the games, and he also doesn't want me watching him over his back because he knows I don't want him playing the game. So I, of course, don't let him do that. Homework is done here at the table. There's a spot, and there's a spot in the house, and it's in a public place. That way, I don't have to be over your shoulders. I don't have to be, but I don't want that device in the bedroom. And one of the worst things we can do as parents is let that device go into the bedroom, because then you lose all control, right? And like Joe was saying, if these kids are very, when it comes to downloading something and doing something productive, these kids are horrific. They don't know the first thing about like what the caps lock button does or how to type. They're all like hunting and pecking. But when it comes to finding like pornography in video games, they become like a hacker, like from, just this insane level of things. So that needs to be a priority. If my kid has a school issue device, it's not his device, and it's certainly not going upstairs, because again, there's implications for the kind of things that they would happen if they're alone with it. I don't know, Joe, what were you gonna say?
No, yeah, you hit it all. You hit it all.
Okay, so I'd like to now segue. There are so many questions about screen addiction. So I know that this is hard. You're teachers, you're not psychologists dealing with all these people with an addiction problem. And let's not even take on whether there's addiction. There is addiction. There's no question. If you want the definition, you can look it up. Kids get addicted. So that means the horse has already left the barn for a lot of the parents that are giving up these questions. So here's a variety of them. One parent asked about how to get kids to do anything other than screens. My kid is addicted to screens. Another asked about what to do as a grandparent when they see overuse in their adult parent children. Another parent asked about what to do when a divorced parent in one home indulges and you don't. So have at it.
Yeah, those are all obviously really difficult those are parenting decisions that have implications, obviously, in school and at home, and how the kid's going to develop. The addiction piece is, like you said, it's very real. We see kids get super emotional when asked to put their phones away. They get these monster outbursts. As far as you went through several questions there. One of them was about a grandparent talking about the adult child's use. One of the things that we know is not just with phones, but kids mimic parental behaviors, good and bad. And so when the answer to a kid is, hang on, and even if it really is all work, and I catch myself saying it all the time, like, hang on, sweetheart, when my 9-year-old comes into the office here and asks me a question, hang on, I just got to finish this one email. What message is that send to her? That I feel gross when I do it, and I think many of us do that, but we have to be very cognizant as parents of what we're modeling, because most of us in this session, I'm assuming, probably grew up without any kind of cell phone, or any kind of smartphone anyway. And if you grew up without a smartphone, then your brain had time to develop all the way, and you developed your critical thinking skills, you developed your ability to focus, you developed all these skills on your own. And so when we engage with the media, it's still addictive for us, but we have a little bit more of an ability to self-regulate. But when a kid sees, oh, mom or dad is always on the phone, so I better be too, that's how they're growing up. That's their world. And so when they get to be an adult, there's not much of a chance that they're not going to go down that road even deeper.
Yeah.
I would just add to that. We're all just doing the best we can, right? And I grew up with video games, and I love playing video games, and I would go play video games for a couple hours, and I was a latchkey kid, and of course I would go home and play 2 hours of video games before my parents got home. Like, there's utility to video games, right? Like we need a chance to unwind and relax, and kids need that too. And you don't have to worry if your kid's playing 2 hours of video games or an hour of video games a night, or here and there, but the issue becomes the overuse, and that's what we wrote the book for, right? So if your kids 9 hours a day on average. Well, when are they talking to the parents? When are they having those face-to-face interactions that are so critical to development, right? So if your kid's going away, from in my households, it's when they go to the grandparents, that's when they're on their screens, right? And you know what? If they go there for a day and they unwind and they play a little bit of Roblox or whatever, that's fine. That's something they can do the day they go for grandma's once a month, right? But when they're here in my house, I'll control what I can control, right? And that's where you have your kingdom, your fiefdom, and
Right.
if your kids get that human interaction, they get what they need, they're going to be okay. If they're not getting any of it and there's total opportunity loss, then that's a time to be concerned.
Right. Yeah, I love the way you talk about opportunity cost, because I always think, we could say, don't, use your screens, again, in fights about that. But we can also say, okay, you go to school, then you're going to do your volunteering, then you're going to go to some of your activities, and then you're going to have your chores, and then you're going to eat dinner with us without screens and homework, and then go to bed on time. You can't get addicted if you actually keep them in the healthy activities that are incompatible with overuse. So I love that. And the other thing that you all say that I love is give your children an opportunity to be bored. And that's a way more profound concept than it sounds like, because being bored and having your meandering thoughts and your default mode of wandering thoughts is where problem solving, curiosity, creativity happens. And sometimes we think boredom and their complaints about boredom is another problem be solved. And sometimes, the whole family needs to go to, screen rehab, which I call a national park with a cabin without cell service. And, you just can't. So would you talk a little bit more about how you see screen-free time helping the child development agenda we all have?
Well, I will say it's interesting to bring that up. I teach psychology and performance psychology, and we're on our unit on sleep. And one of the things, I'll say is if you have a problem during the day, you ignore your problems during the day, they're going to come out at night. And one of these things these kids do that I think is, if they go up to go take a piss, right, they'll put in their AirPods and they'll listen to music on their way to go do the water. As soon as they step out in the hall, they disconnect and they're listening to something, right? They don't have that moment of quiet to process all of the things that they've had. I had this fight with this girl today, and this teacher said this mean thing. They never process, and it's no wonder they can't sleep, and it's no wonder that they have so much anxiety. They don't, like you were mentioning, they don't have that time to, they're strangers to their own voice, their own thoughts, their own cognitions. It's a foreign voice to them because they drown it out every second. I always tell my students, like, on your way to school, have silence, have 20 minutes of silence a day so that you can have a chance to process your thoughts. We in sports psychology do visualization exercises where we need silence for 10 minutes to visualize our performance. And it's super awkward the first week because they don't know what to do with silence. There's lots of snickering, and it's something that they need practice on, and they develop, and a lot of times they find it worthwhile. But
Yeah.
And
So I have a question for both of you as we kind of wind up here, because so many of us are overwhelmed. We get anxious. We hear about AI, schools turning into a bunch of robots and so forth. And it's always nice with somebody that's as saturated with these pithy issues as you are. What makes you optimistic? What keeps you looking forward to the future with technology use and some of the other things that you've recommended in balance?
For me, I can tell you, because I've had this conversation a bunch recently. The great news to me is that kids are still kids. And none of this that we're talking about today is the fault of these kids. If you had given me a cell phone when I was 15, I'd be using it the same way that they're using it right now. There's nothing unusually bad or weak or incapable about these young people. So all of this is fixable. And if you really talk with young people, and we're in a unique position, Matt and I are, because we, see young people all day, every day, big groups of them. They don't like the fact that they're being manipulated. Like when they get their eyes open to the fact that that persuasive design ensnares them against their will, they don't want to be part of that, and they understand that you know, social media has its place, but for a lot of people it has taken over. And so they're savvy, and they are capable, and they're smart enough to know what is right for them and what is wrong for them. And if we really get them engaged in a conversation about healthy habits, they're willing to do the right thing. They just have to be given the tools. And I think that school really, and this is why, you know, again, with the book, I want, you know, I always want to keep focused on the schools. We have to, in schools, give them that place that is supposed to be this, you know, this safe place for a kid. And I think the kids would really appreciate that. I mean, when I talk to them about not having access to their phone, because, you know, I try and fight the battle all day long, every day, they recognize that they're better off, and they're, you know, in terms of their ability to think and to pay attention and to, you know, laugh with their friends and so on. When the device isn't there, they know it. So that, I mean, I get very optimistic when I think about who these guys actually are.
Yeah, and I know we're out of time, but I would just add to it: kids are still kids, and parents are still parents, and teachers are still teachers. We, you know, Joe and I are not the only teachers out there who are concerned. We are going, you know, we get up in the morning and we do this for, you know, very little money because we want to make these kids better educated and more successful. And we see AI come, ChatGPT come, and we're going to figure it out, right? We've already adjusted. I know Joe and I, I guess we just don't write essays at home anymore. We do it on paper and pencil right in front of me. And that's how we take care of that. So wherever there's a path, they'll get an edge. Students will get an edge for a few weeks. And then we're going to figure out, you know, parents still love their kids and they still want the best for their kids. The issue is, you know, kind of like with the big tobacco, we've been misled, and there's been a tremendous amount of money being put towards that these things are great and we should incorporate, and it's all good. And I think, you know, you're not here as a parent right now because, you know, you're here because you question that too, and you want to know where to set the limits. And as long as that's what you're doing and this is your goal and you love your kids, like, and we love teaching, and kids are still kids, I mean, we're going to figure this out eventually.
Thank you. Thank you so much to everybody that has joined us today. Thank you, Joe and Matt, and thanks especially to all the media partners. If you haven't already, please register for the rest of the Parent Ed Talk series in 2024 so that you don't miss any of the events. We hope you'll join us for the next Parent Ed Talk event, Brave Listening, the secret to safeguarding your child's mental health, with the suicide risk assessment expert, Stacy Friedenthal, on January 10th. Until then, goodbye, and thanks to everybody again. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.